I do have the sharks, and I think we'll go ahead and dissect those, give you guys something to do. And then I've got a real brief lecture and an activity for you. And then, like I said, if there's anything you want to see or review, you can do that on Friday too. I think what we're going to do is a short quiz after that brief lecture, just to give you an opportunity for some more points. Okay, so short-term memory, you guys seem to be really good at that. Okay, population ecology. So this whole last run is ecology. I like to call it science light because most of the stuff is pretty easy to deal with. Not too difficult. The terms, concepts, a lot of the stuff you've already heard of, you're familiar with. So let's just get into it. Population ecology. Study populations in relation to the environment. Now remember, population is a group of the same species living in the same place at the same time. It could be a herd of elephants, all the coyotes in the Coachella Valley. You in this classroom at this given time, you're a student population for this course. It includes environmental influences on variations of population size. Sometimes the environment can wreak havoc on populations and make them small, make them crash. Other times, the environmental conditions can be very favorable and cause them to increase. Population density is how many of each members of a species do we have in a population. Some populations like to be very dense, others not so much. Distribution, where do you find the populations? Are they all localized in one area, or can you find populations of the same species scattered locally or even globally? And then lastly, age structure. What is the different ages of the members of the population? Basically, we're going to break that down into 3 parts. We'll look at pre-reproductive juveniles, reproductive adults, and post-reproductive adults. So population ecology, what is that there? Population ecology. Oh, this should just be population, just the definition of population again. So scratch out ecology. They're not perfect. You guys are the guinea pigs for this now. They're better, much better. Not only are they prettier, but I organize them better, so it's easier to comprehend the material, absorb it. Group of individuals of the same species living in the same place at the same time. I would learn this definition because it's come up twice already in this section, and so it probably would not be a bad one to learn. Usually share many of the same experiences and characteristics. Not only are we talking about the same species that have many of the same characteristics, but they've been through the same thing, especially populations that might be comprised of species that seem to be more long-lived. And a herd of elephants. It's a matriarchal society. You have the mothers with their offspring. You're going to have sisters and aunts. Maybe the grandmothers who have been around for a while, who are no longer reproductive, but can still contribute to society. Just like we have our grandparents around. It's not like, well, grandma's at menopause, let's put her in a boat, put her out in the water and set her on fire. It's not like that. So same thing with the elephants. Even the older members of the populations can contribute to it. Population density, number of individuals per unit, area, or volume. This is entirely species dependent. Entirely species dependent. Influenced by environmental preferences and social interactions. If you look at ants, they are a societal insect. They have the queen that does all the breeding, and most of the rest of the ants work to serve her. They've got the workers, the drones, the guards, all these things that help protect the queen and basically the colony. So you need lots of ants to do all this. You could look in your yard and find probably millions of ants within your yard. But I bet you don't find any mountain lions in your yard. Mountain lions are cats. They're solitary. They prefer one mountain lion for about 100 square miles. Because to the mountain lion, that's how much space it needs to find enough food to support itself, and for the females, their offspring. So the female territories usually don't overlap. Males might overlap female territories because one male might breed with about 3 or 4 other females, but they don't tolerate them for too long because they look at that as somebody who's going to take their resources from, or from their offspring, so they don't last too long. So it has everything to do with environmental preferences and social interactions, and it is entirely species dependent. So how do you determine population density? Okay, we need to go up into Joshua Tree and count how many bighorn sheep were up there. Or go to an area where you might find mountain lions, and let's see how many mountain lions there are in the area. How do you do that? You just do it by sight, counting the number of individuals. The jaguar is incredibly elusive. It's a South American cat, one of the biggest big cats. Tiger, lion, jaguar. And it's very difficult to find him, especially when he lives in dense vegetation. So maybe it's not the easiest thing just to look for the cat and try and count the number of individuals you see. You could start by counting a random plot, calculating averages and determining size of population. For something that moves, like a cat, may not be the easiest thing in the world to do, but if you're talking about plants, that works out pretty ideally. Maybe you make several square meters in a given area and count the number of grasses in those areas. We're doing a lot of studies like that right now because of climate change. Now, when you think of climate change, it's not like the Earth's going to get baked and there's not going to be any vegetation. It's all going to be like living in the desert. What we're going to see, though, is some vegetation that might be more suitable to areas that might be cooler and more moist are going to give way to vegetation that's adapted to areas that are drier and a little bit warmer, like grasses. So where you might have had mixed vegetation, it might give way to grasses because the climate doesn't tolerate it anymore. And you can determine this by randomly putting plots out and counting all the different kinds of plants, the different species of plants in that given plot. Observing indices of size of population, shelters, tracks, or fecal droppings. Where a cat like this might bed down for the night. Seeing how many of those that you see, because they're solitary. If you find 3 or 4 of those, chances are it's not the same one with 3 or 4 different places. It's probably 3 or 4 different cats. Tracks would be very useful. They're almost like fingerprints. You can tell distinct individuals apart. Fecal droppings. How would you like that job? Here's a bag. Go out and see how many jaguars there are. And so you're picking up feces. So what's that going to tell you? Well, it'll tell you a lot about its diet, but it's going to slough off DNA in the feces too. So you can run DNA analysis on the feces and determine individuals. And then counting individuals, just simply going out. If you're into birds, we have bird counts, usually in the spring of the year, pretty much throughout the U.S., where you can catch migratory birds, birds that inhabit your area. A lot of lawn societies big into that.
So, like, what the feces dropping, do that also work with cheetahs?
Oh, sure.
How do I thought their DNA was like
Well,
similar?
there might be enough variance. Just like there's, even though our DNA among humans, we're the same species, we have a lot of variation in ours, but even within the same family, you will see some variances. So you'll see enough variances to distinguish one from the other, but as far as enough variation that, you know, this is going to survive no matter what happens to them, probably not. Density fluctuation. Why do some populations increase or decrease? What we're talking about. Immigration and emigration. I know, it sounds the same. Basically pronounced the same. Let's spell it. Immigration, the first one, movement of individuals into new areas, where they immigrate from one area into the new area. We've talked about immigration in this country. It's getting to be a bigger and bigger topic. This is the one you usually hear about. Immigration, movement of individuals from original areas to new areas. So immigration is coming in, immigration is leaving. Male African lion with the cub. He's pretty good with the cubs until the males get to be too big. And then he will chase them off because suddenly his dear sons become competition. And so they get chased out. They leave the population, they immigrate. Okay? What they will do is they will find a new pride of lions. They will challenge the male. If they beat him, then they take over the pride. They immigrate into another pride. That's why lion kind of illustrates both. Males get chased off, but then they find new prides, and if they can defeat the current male of the pride, maybe an older or injured male, then they take over the pride. They immigrate into the new pride.
What if the male never is able to defeat another male?
Which probably happens a lot, especially with younger or more inexperienced males. And they just go out and try and find a new pride. They'll just keep looking.
So they might be like a kind of like on their own for a while, like a loner.
They might form cohorts with maybe siblings, other males, or maybe random males. But that'll only last to a point because then they'll start getting stronger, more powerful, more defensive, and more in need of females for breeding.
What often happens when two male lions or brothers stay together for their whole lives?
It does happen sometimes, and sometimes too on one male, they would have a better chance of taking over a pride, and they might just equally breed. I don't know if it's some innate behavior that says, okay, our genes are equally good, so we'll equally distribute them. We realize we're better together than apart. I don't know. But it does happen sometimes. Dispersion patterns. Dispersion is the pattern of spacing among individual members within a population. Creosote bushes. If you look out in the desert where there's still desert around here, you can see creosote bushes. And they look like somebody purposefully planted them because they seem to be evenly spaced apart. Well, it's not a purpose. It's everything to do with the strategy of the creosote. Because what they do is they release a toxin into the soil that prevents new growth immediately around it. Why would they do that?
Water.
Water. Water is the most highly prized commodity of any living organism in the desert. And so you do all you can to preserve your little bit and to conserve it. And so what the creosote bushes do, and you see them, they're scattered. There's one, there's another, there's one up in the front. You see they're just kind of spaced apart. They're not growing in huge clumps. And that's so they all have an equal chance of surviving. They all have the ability to absorb enough resources from the environment in order to survive. In this case, the resource being water. Now, there are three patterns we're going to talk about: clumped, uniform, and random. Clump is the most common pattern we can find in nature. Individuals aggregate in groups due to nutrients like fungi or social behaviors like wolves. Okay, they're aggregate into groups. That means they clump together. That's what aggregate means. You can talk about an aggregate or a bunch of grapes. Due to nutrients, fungi. Fungi grow in their decaying organic material. And they will make use of it whenever they come across it. Whenever the spores are released, they land on this fallen trail and the fungi grow up. So there's plenty of resource here for the fungi. Or it could be behavior. Wolves, like most dogs, are pack animals. They like being together. They form a social hierarchy, and it works for them. Like I said, cats, solitary individual. It's amazing if you think about it that we were ever able to domesticate cats, because most of the animals we've domesticated are herd, flock, or pack animals. Think about it. Dogs, pack, cattle, herds, sheep, herds, horses, herds, ducks, geese, chickens, flocks. There's not too many solitary animals we've domesticated. Yes. Especially the older ones. The younger ones might be not quite there yet. They might be in there just maturing. The male breed with his offspring, probably not so much. That would be the females who would leave the pride voluntarily, looking for maybe to join another pride or to find a male to fill their own pride.
Are there other animals that show care for their offspring throughout their life that are interested in them like humans?
Other primates do.
Primates do.
Primates are pretty good for that. I'm trying to think what else. I don't think elephants are good for that too. Yeah, I think it gets to be the same thing with the lions as the female, because the matriarchal society. The males will be raised up in the herd, and then they're chased off, and they go to live with other males, and then they kind of get, the male upbringing when they get to be preteens, 10, 12 years old.
Are primates matriarchal or patriarchal?
Patriarchal. But it's more like wolves, where you have like alpha males, beta males, and that, so. Hierarchy. Life history. Traits that affect an organism's schedule for reproduction as well as survival. Variable 1, at what age reproduction begins. Variable 2, how often reproduction occurs. And variable 3, how many offspring are produced. Well, let's take humans for instance. We could say a human can be about, and I know it could be younger than this, most hopefully way longer than this. Say 15, humans can start reproducing. And they're good from about 15 to 45. Upper limit, most stop at about 35 or 40, but that's about when menopause sets in and when women almost have to stop breeding. How many offspring are produced? Most of the time we do one at a time, sometimes two. Every now and then you hear about triplets that were born, identical triplets. Anything more than that is usually 4, 5, 6 through in vitro fertilization. We usually don't produce that many at one time. The elephant, mentioned that already. About 15, 16 when they start breeding, they'll breed until they're about 40, 45, if that long, and they have one offspring at a time. Gestation period is 22 months, and the baby weighs about 250 pounds. Ouch. And you're thinking, please, don't let me come back as an elephant in life. Hamster. I got the other end of the spectrum, something itty bitty. 21-day gestation period, that sounds pretty good, being pregnant less than a month. But you could have 12 young per litter. Suddenly this doesn't sound real fun. And look at this, you can start breeding at 4 months of age, the lifespan of approximately 3 years. So you could literally breed almost 2.5 years out of the 3 years of your life. Oh my God. Having 12 pups at a time at a clip of about every 4 months. So that's what, almost 144 offspring?
Don't female hamsters eat their young or something?
Sometimes they could,
Sometimes they do.
that's not the rule. Usually they're stressed or something like that, maybe they've been handled, or maybe the male's, taking care of it or something like that. Not as a rule. There would have to be something wrong with the baby for her to eat. But it's a rodent. Why people want rodents as pets, I don't know.
Are monkeys good for pets?
I'd rather have a cat than a rodent. Okay. I'm sorry. Put my foot in my mouth again. Yes.
How come, like sometimes when like the dogs have puppies, the mom will sometimes sit on the dogs. She doesn't want them anymore. Was that just my dog?
What?
No, I've seen that before. I've seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a dog.
Huh?
Did she kill it or?
Well, yeah, because she had the puppies and then, I don't know, maybe she was tired of having puppies. I don't know.
Something for any animal like that, I mean, obviously, the number of teats will determine how many offspring will be successful in surviving. Sometimes they can share and survive okay, but if she feels like there's too many puppies and they're not going to get enough nourishment, she might pick out the one that might be the weakest.
That makes sense because she was a German Shepherd and it was a litter of 12.
Yeah, I don't think they have that many teats.
Yeah, they don't.
Or if the dogs
It's a
are
lot.
handled, the puppies are
I don't
handled
really
a
think
lot.
that has all that much to do with it. I know people said that about birds before and everything like that too. I don't think that really has a lot to do with that either. But it could. Okay, where are we now? Let's take a break here. It's already 20 after. Be back here at 25 past. Large numbers counter low survival rates. You play the percentages. Especially if you're not going to be around to help raise them up. Salmon swimming upstream, they exhaust themselves so much when returning to their breeding grounds where they were born that there's not much life left in them. So they'll produce enough sperm, enough eggs to hopefully get you to the next generation. This is what salmon fry look like. They've got the large yolk sac, so no dependency on the parents for anything. They've got food to get them started. They get big enough, they start feeding on their own. They'll do the same thing. They'll make the trip downriver. They'll wait in the delta. They'll swim out to the ocean once their bodies have adapted from freshwater to saltwater, and then they'll return and repeat the same thing their parents did in about the whole 6 or 7 years.
Are those yolk sacs like really
Yes.
edible?
I don't know. For the salmon,
salmon?
yes.
But like if you think about it, it's like chicken eggs. Like they kind of.
Is that some kind of delicacy?
No, they
Small these
serve,
are.
yeah, they serve that.
So you have to get a lot of them. Yeah.
Thousands, yeah.
Yeah, I eat that at sushi all the time. Seriously.
Heteroparity, the opposite of Sedell parity. Producing small numbers of offspring at one time, then repeating. Small numbers means more care and higher survival rates. You find this in higher animals. Again, going back to the example of the elephant, the highest one probably in this category, where you only have one offspring at a time. You never get twins in elephants. I don't think with you can support that. 250 pounds, 22 months. I think if she had more than one, it would probably kill her. And there's a lot of care in raising this. It's raised by the whole population. It takes an entire village to raise the elephant.
What do you use for other animals? You don't just mean like fire.
Well, in comparison to the salmon, we're talking about reptiles, birds, and mammals.
Oh.
But I just went to the extreme to elephants, which the smallest number, and then repeating it probably the fewest number of times. Because even with humans, if we got one at a time, you want to try and have as many kids as you want, 19 and counting or whatever number they're up to now.
22.
The 20, whatever. That our gestation is only 9 months, so theoretically you can come into breeding again much sooner than elephants could.
Right. I just wasn't sure what you meant by higher animals.
Yeah. So basically, reptiles, birds, mammals. Amphibians still fall. I guess amphibians and some fish would practice this, but for the most part, we'll just go with higher animals: reptiles, birds, mammals. Because some fish and amphibians don't. As far as I know, I don't think any amphibians fall into this category, but they do lay lots of eggs and there's very little parental care. But they can reproduce several times throughout their life. Population growth, it's in italics. You don't have to write this down. Life histories of organisms are necessary for understanding population growth. Populations may increase rapidly for a while, but numbers level off, decline due to limited resources and buildup of toxic wastes. Unlimited population increase does not occur for any species, even something like bacteria. If we let bacteria just grow and grow and grow, eventually they will consume all the resources in their environment and they'll produce enough toxic waste that they will pretty much poison their environment in which they cannot continue to grow. And they'll actually start dying off. So it is not unlimited for any species. We look at life histories trying to plot, plan the survival rate of organisms when we're looking at something that's endangered, specifically monitoring its reproductive rate, seeing if it's going to produce enough offspring to remain endangered and not go extinct. Or maybe it's for people. Maybe we're trying to figure out how big of communities to build, what kind of schools we need in an area, to support the growing population of younger people, kids. How life histories affect species population, again, it's in italics, you don't have to write it down. Bacteria reproduce by fission every 20 minutes and, with no mortality, would cover Earth to a depth of 1 foot in about 36 hours. Thank goodness for limiting resources and toxic wastes. Elephants may produce 7 offspring in a 50-year lifespan. It's really hard to find a picture of elephants and bacteria, but I think they did pretty good. What they've done is they've taken bacteria and smeared it on a plate in the shape of an elephant. Scary that I found it, even scarier that somebody did that. Okay, when we talk about population growth, there are specific terms you need to be familiar with in order to better understand them. Zero population growth occurs when birth and death rates of a population are equal. For humans, if every couple had 1 son and 1 daughter, that would be zero population growth. Because eventually the son and daughter would replace the father and mother, not with each other. California, not Kentucky. But what we're saying is they will replace them in the whole human population. If you exceed that, you increase the population. If you don't come up to that, you don't have at least 2 kids, then what happens is the population starts to decline. Exponential population growth, maximum increase of a population under ideal conditions. I like this picture, white-tailed deer. We don't have them out here, at least not as much as we do back east. Populations have exploded of white-tailed deer in recent years, in the last 10, 20 years, because we've eliminated all the top predators. There's no wolves, there's no mountain lions back east. They've been gone for a while. The population just really gotten a foothold recently. And one of the biggest dangers is them getting hit by cars. Not just for them, but if you hit something this large, what happens is you can do a lot of damage to you. People have died in car accidents in collisions with white-tailed deer. I hit a deer once, so I'm not just against rodents and birds. I took out a deer once too. Clipped it. The cops took it out finally when he got there. But yeah, I either broke the back legs, the back, or something. Irreparable damage, in other words. Just came out of nowhere. And I wasn't speeding or anything like that. Thank goodness, or else it could have been a lot more damage to the car, myself, or Humans are experiencing exponential population growth. It's starting to slow down a little bit right now, but it started happening about 200 years ago, late 17, early 1800s, and has been accelerating ever since. We'll talk more about that. Carrying capacity, maximum population size and area can support over an extended period of time. Now, you have an area, and it has so many plants, so many other animals that might be viewed as flesh and prey species. So, certain organisms can survive in that area. If you have just the right number, not too many, not too few, then that area can sustain those organisms for an indefinite amount of time, as long as those resources are there, flesh. That's carrying capacity. Logistical population growth, when carrying capacity is reached, population growth levels off. Organisms move into a new area, and there's all these untapped, unlimited resources, and they start to exploit them. Their population increases, but before the resources are gone, the population starts to level off. That's logistical population growth. A reindeer. Reindeer in a given area exceed the carrying capacity. So why is it that reindeer don't die off or don't totally destroy the area in which they live? They move on. They migrate. They don't stay in an area too long. They don't exceed the carrying capacity because they don't stay there over an extended period of time. They move on. What would our area be like if we had all the people from Coachella Fest stay? What if they never
A nightmare?
Yeah. That would be exceeding the
Big
carrying
party.
capacity to which this
Huh?
area has been
Big
accustomed.
I'd be broke.
So it can hold large population, an area can, as long as the populations don't stick around too long, as long as they move on. So logistical population growth, birth rates decrease and death rates increase with increasing population density. So we've got the lag phase. To be honest, the human population spends most of its time in the lag phase. I told you the last 200 years, but there's been thousands of years before that, the human population was just kind of hanging around. Then they took off. This is the exponential growth phase, the stationary phase, and at some point in time, you might hit the death phase. Maybe that's just the end of the time for that species, or maybe they've, even in the stationary phase, they've consumed all the resources. Something happened for that to eventually fall off. Density-dependent factors. When we talk about density dependency, we're talking about factors that affect based on the number of individual organisms. It has everything to do with population density. We've talked about this before. Intra-specific competition, competition within a single species. Competition for resources between individuals of the same species, when resources are in short supply, tends to decrease population. Now, Darwin's finches, classic example. Keep going back to that. When they got to the Galapagos Islands, they were all seed-eating finches. They kept eating the same seeds. The seeds became harder and harder to find. So they got together one day, had a little finch council meeting, and said, okay, what are we going to do? Not enough seeds left to support us much longer. It's an island. It's got limited resources. It's not like we can call for delivery or go for carry out or something like that. And so they decided, okay, we're going to keep eating seeds because we want to. But some of you other ones, why don't you try eating other parts of the plant, and why don't you guys try eating insects? And so they started to diversify. This interspecific competition drove them to diversify. That's why we call them Darwin's finches, because it was all about competition leading to natural selection, which led to evolution. So intraspecific competition. When you start eating different things, you start living in different areas, maybe your beak, if you're a finch, changed to eat insects better than seeds, or other parts of a plant better than seeds, and that's what led to all the different kinds of finches. So intraspecific competition. Here we have the common ancestor from South America, and we see that they diversified into the bud eater, vegetarian finch, tree finches, insect eaters living up in trees. You see how their beaks change to exploit the insects. Other seed eaters, cactus flower eaters, more seed eaters, but they were living in different areas. The large ground finch, the medium ground finch, size, coloration, and indicating they lived in different areas. Territoriality. Behavior in which an animal defends a bounded physical space against encroachment by other individuals, usually of the same species. Tends to limit populations. I bet I could put some of you in a small room with about 20 different puppies or kittens, and you would love it. You would just sit and play with the puppies and kittens until they all fell asleep or something. Yeah, that'd be torture. Let's say I put you in a small room with 20 other people. That wouldn't be so fun, would it? Wouldn't be playtime. So, of different species, we can tend to tolerate that. The same species, we need our personal space. Maybe it's just because you feel uncomfortable too close to other people. Or maybe it's because there's limited resources. Tigers. Cats, again, solitary, the lion's exception to the rule. Here's one that said marking a tree. This is my territory, this is the area in which I live. Cats tend to do that. This one's making a face. It's called the Flamen response. What they do is they curl their lip, and it allows them to take in the odor of the scent marked tree better, exposing it to the nasal cavity and the olfactory lobes in there, and allows them to get a better whiff of the smell, so to speak. And they'll hold it for maybe a few seconds. Makes for a funny face. But that's him checking out the territory of something else. There's somebody here. Now, what does it say in that scent? If it's two males, it's like saying, this is my territory, you stay out. The other male's like, okay, fine. Either I'll mark on top of your territory, when I find you, I'm going to kick you out of your territory. Or maybe it's a lesser male thinking, okay, this guy smells pretty big, I'm going to make mine a territory somewhere else. It's a female. Maybe she's marking the tree saying, okay, it's breeding season, come find me. I'm receptive to you for now. It just depends. Question?
Why do dogs pee over other dogs' pee?
Territoriality. They're just marking their territory over it.
So, do like the more alpha dogs pee more?
I don't know if volume has anything to do with it. I
More
think it's
often,
just whoever's mark is on top.
Really? That's it? That's
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I'll be out working in my front yard and I'll see people walking the dogs up and down, and they'll come to a post in the yard and they'll all smell this, like, you know, who's left their calling card here today? Who's been by? Who's visited? So, yeah, way of communication.
Do both the males and females mark like that?
I believe so. Yes.
So it's not urine. It's
No, it's a scent gland here that will express it, and it might come out the same place where urine does, but it's a scent gland that causes that. Okay, colors change. Wonder why I did that. Health. Oh, I know why I did it, because it's not a definition. I'm smarter than I realize. I know, you're just overwhelmingly amazed, aren't you? Health. An increase in population density results in an increase in disease incidence. Flu in humans. In flu season, you're always worried about being exposed to somebody else with the flu and you catching the flu. If you live your life devoid of other people, you never have to worry about catching the flu, right? But if you're sitting next to somebody and somebody coughs on you or sneezes on you, then the concern is there. Predations. Prey population fluctuates, predator populations fluctuate as well. Snowshoe hare and lynx, classic example. We'll talk more about that in a second. And I'll talk more about human disease as well. Remind me, I'll let you make the announcement at the end. Who's got the big clothes? That's the name, Snowshoe Hare. It's a cat. And a rabbit's just a rabbit.
Our rabbits were
Spider-Man good?
I enjoyed it. It wasn't great, but I enjoyed it. Good direction. A little off balance.
Who directed
The
it?
soundtrack sucked. Mark Webb, the director for soundtrack's awesome. But that's good. Okay. Health. Flu in humans. Do I need to go back a second?
No.
Everybody okay? This is a projection of a flu outbreak, say something like the swine flu. Now, you look at some of the areas in the world where you have 100,000 members of the population, the darker it gets, the more problems you're going to have. Here are, we'll talk about this later, two of the more densely populated areas in the world, India and China. You see a lot of it in Africa, some places even darker there. These two countries in the Middle East. South America, Central America, we're pretty densely populated. Why wouldn't we have more problems with death rates during a flu outbreak?
We have the best medical care in the world.
We've got the best medical care in the world.
No, we don't.
Being a little sarcastic.
Oh.
Us and Australia. We used to anyway.
Canada, France.
We have more
New Zealand.
inoculations, don't we?
Yeah,
Do
New
what?
Zealand.
We have more,
We probably have more opportunities and better research in the area, but the availability to everybody may not be as good as some other parts of the world. Okay, so where it's densely populated, you're going to have more deaths due to the flu. Like I was saying in this slide here, an increase in population density results in an increase in disease incidence. But because of more developed countries having better options as far as healthcare goes, that kind of offsets that a little bit. Snowshoe hare and the lynx, predation. The light green is the snowshoe hare, the orange, the Canadian lynx. If you look, every time you have an increase in incidence in the snowshoe hare, you have an increase in incidence in the lynx. When the snowshoe hare population crashes, there's a little bit of a lag within the crash in the population of the lynx. In other words, the two species are tied together, predator and prey. The predator will not reproduce. There's not enough prey species for the mother and the offspring. So when the prey population crashes, the predator population crashes, which now says, okay, predator population is down, the prey can take off again, and then after that, the predator's like, oh wait, I can take off again now too, and then it takes off. And then it's not that, I'll talk more about this later. You notice the lynx populations are lower. There's about a 10-to-1 ratio of prey to predator species. So for every lynx you have to have about 10 rabbits in order to sustain that lynx. And it all has everything to do with how much energy is flowing through the rabbit population into the lynx to help support the lynx. Again, more on that later. So these are actually pretty good numbers, about 140 up here, a little bit more than 10% of the population. Toxicity, an increase in population density results in an increase in toxic metabolic waste. In Bio5, we talk about this, yeast. Alcohol content of wine is 13%. That's the maximum amount of ethanol, or waste in this case, which wine-producing yeast can tolerate. We talked about it with bacteria. Eventually they make their environment toxic, because the metabolic waste buildup. Yeast does the same thing, except in this case, the metabolic waste is ethanol. This is what we actually use to make things like beer, wine, champagne. And it usually doesn't go much above 13% because it kills the yeast. Maxed out. At least when we talk about like making wine. So all of these are density dependent factors. Intrinsic factors. Yeah, I had a little bit of fun with rats. An increase in population density results in an increase in aggressive behaviors, increasing stress while decreasing the population. Rodents are good for this. Rodents, well, can breed like rodents. Population takes off. And yes, there is an upper limit when the population gets too dense. It's putting you in that room with 20 other people. It's putting you on a rock with birds just 2 neck lengths apart from you. You get irritable. You get aggressive. Only to this point, aggression could lead to death. And it definitely decreases the population because the females just will not breed if there's too much aggressive behavior. So intrinsic factors. Something that's kind of difficult to put your finger on, but yeah, it happens. Now, shifting gears, pay attention. It says density independent factors. Things that affect population that has nothing to do with the population size. Birth and death rates are unrelated to population density, generally affected by abiotic factors. What are abiotic factors again? Non-living factors. One of the examples we could take here are aphids. Anybody know what aphids are?
They're the things that grow on trees, aren't they?
The what?
They grow on trees.
Those are apples. I know it's confusing, circle letter A.
They eat the apples.
They're tree predators. They eat trees.
They're plant predators. Usually trees are too big for them. But they are a garden pest. You can spray your plants with them. It will get rid of them. Or you can go to the nursery sometimes. They'll have little bags of ladybug beetles. And you can release them in your garden because ladybug beetles love to eat aphids. And that's what this one is doing, chowing down aphids. You blow one up and look at it. This is what it looks like. It's got piercing parts to get into the plant. They are a plant parasite. Okay. We don't have to worry about them out here too much because they are temperature sensitive. Mean fecundity, reproductive rates, and the age, how long they live. You can see when it gets too warm, at 95 degrees, they flatline. There's nothing going on there. It's too warm for them. 86, a little bit of a blip, and they die out in about 25 days. At 77, they peak with fecundity, but they don't last as long, maybe lasting 30 days. At 68, the cooler it gets, the better they get. Not quite as much fecundity, but over longer periods of time, lasting almost to 40 days. Now, survivorship curve. How long do they last at different temperatures? At 95 degrees, they might last 10 days. At 86 degrees, they're good for about 22, 23 days. At 77, they're up to about 31 or 32 days, maybe a month. And then at 68 degrees, they're good for almost 35, 36, 37 days. So temperature, an abiotic factor, affects the population, but it doesn't have, population size has nothing to do with population density. So it's a density independent factor. Population dynamics, complex interactions between biotic, predator, predation, and or abiotic climate factors that cause fluctuations in population size. And again, the basic example being the snowshoe hare and the lynx. We've got bobcats in the area. They're like a smaller version of the lynx. They tend to hunt at lower elevations, higher elevations. Lynx tend to be less aggressive than bobcats. It's that old Napoleonic complex. So you guys can see just biology. You still get your money's worth. So what we're seeing here is a predator-prey relationship. And we've already mentioned that as prey population increases, the predator lags a little bit behind, but it will increase. Just like when the prey population crashes or decreases, then the predator population will eventually crash or decrease, usually with a little bit of a lag time. Okay, you don't need to write this down. Just reiterating what I've already said. When food is abundant, the hare population increases. When the hare population increases, the lynx population increases. When food is scarce, the hare population decreases. When the hare population decreases, the lynx population decreases. Now this is just a generalized graph of what the predator-prey relationship looks like. Prey increases, the predators increase. Prey decreases, the predators decrease. And notice there's a little bit of a lag time in between that. It takes them a little bit of time to figure out, oh wait, there's not enough food for the kids. Well, we'll try and make most of the opportunities we can with these kids now. Let's hold off having as many or as often breeding kids, whatever, until the prey population increases, until there's more food. Human population growth. You don't need to know this, just stuff to help keep you up at night. In 1650, the global population was 500 million. In 1850, 200 years later, the global population doubled to 1 billion. In 1930, 80 years later, about half the time, the population doubled again to 2 billion. In 1975, the global population doubled again in about 45 years, again about half the time, doubled again. 2008, the global population about 6 billion. It's up to about 7 right now. Increases by about 73 million people per year. Increases by about 201,000 people a day. I know, it's scary. Here's what the human population growth graph looks like. Starts out down here, 2 to 5 million years ago. Just guesses. There weren't census takers back then. Have a pretty good idea. Around 7, 6, 5,000 BC. This is the rise of the different empires, the Egyptians and others. And then we see it as it continues to progress. 1 AD, 1,000 years. Whoops, dip. Anybody knows what this dip is?
The bubonic plague.
Bubonic plague, Black Death, yeah. So it actually caused a dip in the human population, but after that, long about the Industrial Revolution, we see the population take off, and it's continued to grow ever since. These are projected dates, predictions, where it might come out. We're already here at about 7 billion. Do you have to wait till about the year 3000 to see this level off? Not really. Annual rate of increase peaked in 1962 at about 2.19% per year. Annual rate of increase in 2003 was 1.16%, so we're not increasing as rapidly. We're starting to see the human population level off a little bit. Projected annual rate of increase in 2050 about 0.4%. Declines due in part to voluntary population control. And yes, I'm guessing in some parts of the world there is involuntary population control. And diseases such as AIDS. This is Africa in 2007. Based on statistics from the UN, the darker it is, the more prevalent AIDS is. In some communities, 15 to 28% are HIV positive. Most of Africa, at least 5 to about 15%. Some areas there's no data over here. Other areas in the lighter it's about less than 1%. HIV estimates in the US about 3%, so considerably less than Africa. So disease, famine, other controls, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. When we talk about that, these countries in the northern part of Africa tend to be a little bit better off. It's these countries down here below the Saharan Desert that runs up through here, that this is where Africa gets hit the hardest. Age structure, relative numbers of individuals at each age in a population. What kind of information does this tell us? What allows us to project the population's growth trend? Reveals anomalies within a population like the baby boomers. Classic photo taken right after World War II, the E-Day, I think, within Europe Day. Sailor grabbed a nurse, gave her a kiss in Times Square, photographer snapped it, and it became world famous. I think they're both since deceased. According to some reports, the guy who probably was a sailor died just this year, I think. Now, the baby boomers. Does anybody know the time span of the baby boomers?
45 to 1963.
Not quite. 45 is right after the war, and about to 1964. The baby boomers. When the guys returned from World War II, things were getting better in the world. The economy was improving a little bit, life was a little bit better, and they got back home after missing their wives, their girlfriends, whatever, and they started to have kids. And these became the baby boomers. It's an increase in that population in those approximately 20 years. After that, the baby boomers didn't have quite so many kids, and we've seen basically a decrease in the population ever since. So, here's the United States. This is a few years old. This is the baby boomer population right here. You see it's kind of this bubble moving through the population in the U.S., both males and females. It's probably right about here right now. Right about the age where the security, health care for the elderly as its population pushes into retirement age. So we can use age structure like this to help us determine social, economic, political trends, things like that. But you notice, after the baby boomers, a little bit of a hiccup here, but even lower here, we're starting to see a decrease in the population. So what does that mean? Well, let's take you guys, for instance. Unless the population increases, when you start working, you're going to be paying into this population up here as they retire and collect Social Security. And what's left for you when you get to this point?
Nothing.
The population doesn't increase behind you, there's probably not going to be enough money left. Worst case scenario, scary fact. Of course, I'm hoping like Star Trek, by that time we don't even need money anymore. Okay, Afghanistan. We'll talk about Afghanistan in a second. You see large population, but look how it decreases as it goes up. Very few people, even 65, 70 and older. Very small part of the population. Italy, look, they've got their baby boomers too. Even the losers got to have kids. So we see similar trends in the U.S. We see this large population here, and then we see a decrease after that. In fact, you see the decrease here is almost the same size as the older population up there, a little bit larger. There's a lot of European countries, a lot of developed countries where they're seeing a decline in their population. And they're trying to encourage people to move to those countries to help increase the population, that they could have even worse problems than we in a more immediate future. Infant mortality throughout the world, obviously also leading to populations. The darker it is, the fewer deaths. You see, again, these same countries, Western Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand. Russia's not quite so bad off, but you see here, anybody know what country this is?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. Anybody know what country this is?
Yemen?
No,
Iran?
no, that's right here.
Israel?
It's Iraq.
Iraq.
Iraq?
Right. These two countries are very, very poorly suited for surviving today's economy. They're two of the more harder hit countries. Angola right here, Guinea right here. You see most of the rest of the world. Africa, again, that sub-Saharan Africa gets hit really hard all the time. India, because of its population. China's a little bit better off because its economy is improving. Life expectancy, again, you see the same kinds of trends. Very low, 50 years maybe if you're lucky in sub-Saharan Africa, Afghanistan. Iraq's a little bit better off there. If you want to live to be the longest, move to Australia or one of the Scandinavian countries. Not sure which one it is, sorry. That's Japan over here? Yeah, Japan does pretty good too. They're actually in a population decline as well.
Japan's asking for 100 plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Global carrying capacity, maximum number of people the Earth can support over an extended period of time. Maximum estimates now are about 10 to 15 billion. So we could actually almost double the population, but then we're pretty much maxed out. I don't think I'd like to see us do that. Back in the 1700s, Thomas Malthus wrote an essay saying that the Earth can't support any more people. And about then, there's 1 to 2 billion people on the planet. We've more than tripled that since then. We're still around. He said people are going to start dying. There's going to be wars. There's going to be famine. There's going to be disease. There's going to be genocide going on. Now, part of what he said was true, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. We've seen genocide carried out. We've seen AIDS rampant through the population. We've seen famine. We've seen droughts that are there, very severe, that people just don't have enough food to eat. So in some parts of the world, some of what he said came true, and he wrote this, like I said, about 200 years ago. Why hasn't this happened in the rest of the world? There are two things that have occurred that have prevented us from becoming like sub-Saharan Africa.
Technology.
Like when they develop chemistry, they develop like fertilizers for the earth to show.
Technology, especially in what two areas?
Health and.
Healthcare, because we've been able to keep people alive longer, because we've increased the infant mortality, or decreased the infant mortality rate, increased the survival rate of infants, and agriculture, because we can make more food to support more food. Technology in those two areas, healthcare and agriculture, is what has allowed us to really exceed the carrying capacity of the earth. So the global carrying capacity, you see the darkest are the greatest, again, India, China, the blue here that you see in other parts of the world. We kind of fall into the category of a lot of the less developed countries of the world in some areas. Again, Australia, not a bad place to live. Scandinavia, Japan's still a little heavy, but again, their population's in decline. Ecological footprint, summary of land, water, area appropriated by each nation to produce all the nutrients it consumes and absorb all the waste it generates. Is that true? Do we grow everything here that we eat? Do we take care of everything here within our own borders? No, we import a lot of stuff. We export a lot of stuff. We import more than we export now, I believe. There's a little bit of a discrepancy there. The U.S. and world in general are slightly above carrying capacity.
I thought it was like twice as much.
It's pretty high, yeah.
What?
She said it's about twice as much. We import more than we export.
Well, no, just that we're using more resources than anybody else.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Except that
Gotta
now
know what we
India
should.
and
Yeah.
China,
Yeah.
like they're doing things like now everybody in India and China wants their own car. It used to be just in America, and we're gonna have huge problems very, very soon.
And so pollution is on the rise in those countries because people aren't riding their bikes as much, literally. But everybody's got a little bit of money now, so let's buy cars. I'm sure they don't have the environmental controls we have in this country. They're doing all kinds of things. Something that's really up in China right now is eating wild meat. It's a wild animal, doesn't matter what it is. Hey, it's wild, I've got a few extra bucks to afford it, so I'm gonna go buy something here to try and eat it.
They make up for it by eating all the cockroaches too, though.
See what?
And spiders.
Say that again?
Like they have like the cockroaches on a stick.
Really?
Yeah. In like the bazaars.
You ever stepped on one of those? They smell just as bad on the inside as the outside. I don't see why anybody could eat anything like that. Yeah,
Crunchy.
I'm sure.
And there's like a trend in weightlifters right now that they eat crickets, like cricket peanut butter. It's disgusting.
So that's what makes the peanut butter crunchy. I'm glad it's super smooth.
So it's
Cream and peanut butter.
Or grasshoppers are crickets.
doesn't bread have a lot of acids in it?
Doesn't what?
Bread,
I have no idea.
isn't it guy now?
It's good. Be careful about that because I'm not vegetarian anymore. Okay. Carbon dioxide emissions in metric tons is what you were saying, Amy. You see the darkest purple, places like Russia, China, India. Look at over here, the U.S.
Why
We're bad
Russia?
about that.
Yeah, why not?
What are they doing?
A lot of factories.
They've got a big population.
Keeping warm.
Sure.
It's a lot of factories.
I mean, their economy took off a little bit too after the collapse of the Soviet Empire. All those Russian gangs.
Russian
Making vodka.
Look at the least places. It's these underdeveloped countries where, you don't see a lot going on in there. They don't have the economy to support or need more carbon dioxide emitting factories, cars, things like that. Conveniences that we find in this
What country
Society.
is that as a Pacific Africa?
South Africa, isn't it?
South of this.
It's one of the more developed countries down there. Very tip.
Why is Europe have tighter like EPA controls?
Yeah, their environmental controls are a little bit tighter than ours. Plus, because the countries are so close together, it's more densely populated. Mass transit is much better over there than it is over here. You can get away without owning a car in Europe, but you can't do that around LA or San Diego. Never go anywhere. Last slide. Limiting factors to human population growth. What's going to slow us down? Well, depletion of non-renewable resources. What's an example of a non-renewable resource?
Fossil fuel.
Fossil fuels, sure. We use them once, they're pretty much done. We can't reuse them again. Lack of suitable space. Now, that's suitable space. When I fly back and forth to Cincinnati and you fly over parts of the U.S., you look down and there's just not a lot going on there. There's no people, there's no agriculture, there's no cities or anything. But you realize, yeah, there's not a lot of water. And the regions are pretty rugged, pretty mountainous, at least when you get closer to the western part of the U.S. And you just can't go in there and build things. Scarcity of food, water. We live in the desert, we pretty much know at least about the water situation. Excess wastes. The waste build up, we've got to go somewhere with them. We're not just talking human waste here. I mean, if you don't recycle, you got to think about all this stuff ending up in a landfill somewhere. We're just going to keep filling in all the valleys until we're pretty much level and just keep plowing it under. Nuclear waste, some things like that. Where does all that go? Increase in diseases, we've already touched on that. Increase in wars, we've already touched on that as well. Yes?
How come they don't just like eject it out to space?
They do.
You're talking about like what?
Garbage?
All the trash that we
All the trash?
Pretty expensive.
Well,
Your
it's
problem.
also
Put it on Mars.
I mean, if you're talking about like nuclear waste, that would be an option to point to the sun or something like that. But then there's all those safety issues. What if it doesn't make it off the launch pad? What if it collapses? We've had accidents before, so it gets to be that issue.
It's in orbit, space junk causes
Yeah.
problems.
Okay, Thursday. Probably